A $30,000 modeling contract brought a 21-year-old girl to Dubai, but after only a few days, she sent a message full of unease and then completely disappeared. At the same time, all information about the company behind the trip also simultaneously vanished without a trace, forcing investigators to raise the question: was this really an opportunity, or from the very beginning, a perfectly orchestrated trap? Early 2020s, social media was not only a place for connection, but also became a global recruitment market, where modeling agencies, entertainment companies, and fashion brands continuously searched for new faces, especially young women from small towns, those who had striking looks but little experience and were always eager for a breakthrough opportunity. With just an Instagram account with a few thousand followers, a few well-invested photos, and steady engagement, a person could easily fall into the sights of attractive collaboration offers, presented in the form of professional contracts with high income, plane tickets, hotels, and all expenses covered, all creating an almost perfect scenario. Notably, these offers were often accompanied by very convincingly constructed evidence: professional websites, stamped documents, profiles of successful models, and even real accounts confirming positive experiences, leaving victims with almost no reason to be suspicious. It was precisely in this context, when everything could be meticulously staged through technology and psychology, that the line between a real opportunity and a pre-designed trap became more blurred than ever, and it was this very blur that created an ideal environment for criminal networks to exploit, turning very real dreams into the starting point of carefully calculated plans. Amid countless opportunities that appeared legitimate out there, one offer emerged at just the right time, attractive enough to be impossible to ignore, convincing enough to require no suspicion, and also sophisticated enough to conceal something behind it. The person who received that offer was a 21-year-old girl with a very ordinary dream, but her choice unintentionally opened up a story that no one could have anticipated. That girl was Maria Vinogradova, 21 years old, living in Perm, an industrial city in Russia where life moves at a steady pace, and there are few opportunities for breakthrough. She was not a professional model, but had only just begun building her personal image on social media, where she posted carefully curated photos from small-scale beauty pageants, interspersed with a few promotional collaborations with local brands, enough to create the impression that she was gradually getting closer to the fashion industry, but had not truly stepped into it yet. In reality, Maria worked at a dental clinic in a managerial role, a stable and secure job that could last for many years without too much change, but for her, it was not the destination, only a temporary stop. Like many young people, Maria carried a very clear desire to go further, to appear in more professional environments, and most importantly, to have a real opportunity to change the direction of her life. For that reason, she spent time refining her personal image, following agencies, interacting with people in the industry, and always being ready to seize any opportunity that appeared. However, what Maria did not realize was that the combination of her emerging ambition and limited international experience had unintentionally placed her exactly where a well-organized system was looking individuals with enough potential to become the perfect candidate, but also trusting enough not to ask too many questions when an opportunity arrived too quickly and too perfectly. In January 2021, Maria received a direct message from an account representing an international modeling agency. The offer was not merely a simple collaboration, but was constructed as a carefully selected opportunity, with a detailed contract, legal documents, project information, and even visual materials demonstrating professionalism, all prepared so thoroughly that there was almost no room for doubt. In the days that followed, the communication process took place continuously and systematically. Every question Maria had was answered quickly, and the preparatory steps from health checks and document completion to schedule confirmation were clearly guided, creating the impression that she was working with a reliable and experienced organization. After about 2 weeks, everything had been arranged, and on February 14, 2021, Maria left Russia and flew to Dubai, believing that this was the beginning of a major opportunity in her life. During the first few days, she maintained regular contact with her family, sending photos, sharing her experiences, and talking about what was happening. The tone of her messages remained positive, with only slight unfamiliarity with the new environment, but there were no clear signs of anything unusual. Everything seemed to be unfolding exactly as promised. However, by February 17th, the content of the messages began to change when Maria reported that she had been moved to another location, described as a private residence for models with stricter regulations, including limitations on phone use and controlled movement. For the first time, she mentioned feeling uncomfortable, although she still tried to reassure that it might simply be a normal requirement of the job. From that point on, the frequency of communication noticeably decreased. The messages became shorter and lacked detail, until they completely stopped the following day. There were no more responses, no calls, no activity on social media, as if she had disappeared from all channels of communication in less than 24 hours. When they were unable to contact Maria, her family began searching for information about the agency, checking every detail related to her trip in the hope that there was still a clue that had not been noticed. They went through each link again, checked emails, and called the phone numbers that had previously been in contact. But instead of finding more information, they encountered an unusual void. The websites no longer existed, the communication systems had been disabled, and the traces that had once been very clear seemed to have been deliberately erased. What worried them more was not the absence of answers, but the feeling that everything had disappeared too quickly and too systematically, as if someone had prepared in advance for this situation. When the case was reported to the authorities, it was initially approached as a missing person case abroad, with very little concrete data to proceed with the search, which made the verification process significantly limited. For weeks, all efforts yielded almost no clear results. By March 22, 2021, Maria's disappearance began to be reported by newspapers in Russia, initially as short articles about a young woman who vanished after traveling abroad for work. However, when her family spoke out and participated in interviews, the story quickly spread across social media, attracting public attention. Details about the modeling offer, the trip to Dubai, and the sudden loss of contact led many people to raise questions. But while media pressure continued to grow, authorities in the UAE provided almost no official response, leaving the case in a state of ambiguity between public concern and silence from the authorities. The situation only truly changed on March 31st, when a shocking turning point occurred. On a private forum on the dark web, an anonymous account using the name Avenger uploaded a series of videos accompanied by a title suggesting an unresolved financial dispute. At first, these files were considered unreliable, but upon closer analysis, the content inside forced the entire direction of the investigation to change. The video showed the inside of a room designed with transparent glass walls, resembling a display space where everything could be observed from the outside. Behind the glass was a girl in a visibly exhausted condition, almost incapable of resistance, while outside was a group of well-dressed men sitting and watching in a setting arranged like a high-end reception area. The entire scene was organized like a closed performance, where the participants were not only observing but also interacting in various ways, indicating that this was not a spontaneous act, but a coordinated activity, carefully prepared from the space and lighting to the recording system. Technical analysis showed that the video was filmed from multiple angles with high quality, demonstrating the existence of a professionally installed camera system intended for monitoring and storage. More importantly, certain identifying details in the video matched the information provided by Maria's family, particularly a distinctive mark on her body, which helped investigators confirm the victim's identity. In addition, accompanying data indicated that the recordings were made between February 18th and early March, immediately after Maria lost contact, reinforcing the hypothesis that she had been under control throughout that period. Immediately after this information was confirmed, authorities in the UAE launched a raid, focusing on a location identified as directly connected. On April 2nd, a special task force stormed a high-end tower in Dubai, believed to be the operating site of this facility. However, by the time they arrived, the scene had almost entirely been wiped clean. The fire suppression system had been activated beforehand, flooding the entire area and damaging most physical evidence, while key internal structures had already been dismantled and removed from the location. What remained was only enough to confirm that the site had once existed, but not enough to reconstruct the full extent of the activities that had taken place. The subsequent investigation determined that this location operated under the name of a private art center called Orient Contemporary Art Gallery, a space promoted as a venue for exclusive exhibitions and high-end cultural events for the elite. To become a member, clients were required to pay a substantial annual fee, and special events were held with participation costs reaching tens of thousands of dollars, creating a perfect cover for the activities taking place inside. By tracing financial and organizational connections, investigators discovered that behind this facility was a network of influential individuals, including one figure identified as the main coordinator, Felan Azani, a citizen of Russia, who was also the chairman of a charitable foundation supporting underprivileged artists and nurturing young talent. On the surface, his activities appeared entirely legitimate and even positive, but when viewed within the context of the entire case, these connections began to reveal a completely different role, where public-facing operations may have served merely as a facade for a more complex system behind the scenes. On the surface, the foundation operated by Al-Hazrani was presented as an organization supporting young talents from developing countries, specializing in funding art projects, training programs, and international cultural activities. The image he cultivated was that of an influential patron, frequently appearing at major events, being associated with art projects in Europe and the United States, and maintaining extensive relationships with individuals holding positions in diplomatic and business circles. This facade not only helped him build credibility, but also created a network strong enough to avoid suspicion for a long time. However, as investigators delved deeper into the related financial and organizational activities, a completely different picture began to emerge. Alongside the publicly presented charitable operations, Al-Hazrani was identified as being connected to the management of a network of modeling companies operating across multiple Eastern European countries. On the surface, these companies offered international career opportunities, but in reality, they functioned as recruitment and transit points. Financial analysis of the foundation revealed numerous transactions of unclear origin, with large sums of money being transferred through multiple accounts across different jurisdictions, often via intermediary companies to conceal their true source. Over a period of 3 years, more than $20 million had been circulated through entities linked to this network, with the majority processed through hard-to-trace financial platforms and banks in regions with loose regulatory frameworks. When these data were cross-referenced with information collected from Maria's case, investigators determined that Orientix Models, the company that had approached and made the offer to her, was not an independent organization, but merely a link within a larger network. In the 2 years prior, multiple companies with similar structures had appeared under different names such as Vasto Talents, Premium Models Dubai, and Arab Dreamcasting. All of them used the same approach methods, the same image-building strategies, and disappeared after completing a cycle of operation. This systematic repetition indicated that these were not isolated cases, but a model that had been designed, tested, and operated multiple times, with clear objectives and increasingly sophisticated methods. When data from multiple sources were cross-referenced, investigators gradually realized that Maria's case was not an isolated incident, but part of a repeatedly executed operational model with an almost identical structure. Everything began on social media, where recruitment accounts approached young women with attractive offers, then guided them into a pre-designed process, including casting sessions that were largely procedural and preparation steps that appeared professional. However, as soon as a new group of victims was taken out of their home countries, all traces related to the recruiting company from websites to communication accounts completely disappeared, as if they had never existed. Russian police determined that over a 2-year period, at least 12 girls from Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova had lost contact following the same pattern. All of them were between the ages of 18 and 25, had attractive appearances, and maintained active presences on social media. Notably, the final messages they sent to their families were almost identical in content, mentioning an appealing project in Dubai, a separate residence with strict regulations, and restrictions on phone usage. This repetition was not merely coincidental, but a sign of a standardized process. A deeper analysis of the recruitment behavior showed that the group behind it did not select targets randomly, but followed very specific criteria. They focused on young women from smaller cities, those without international work experience, but with a clear desire to change their lives. The victims' social media profiles often reflected an interest in fashion and beauty, along with carefully curated personal images, which made it easier for the perpetrators to approach and build trust. To reinforce credibility, the recruiters also created fake accounts of successful models, posting professional photos, luxurious lifestyles, and international projects, forming a false verification system that led victims to believe they were stepping into a genuine opportunity. When examining the technical infrastructure, experts discovered that the websites of these companies were built on the same platform, using nearly identical interfaces and registered through anonymous services, making it extremely difficult to trace the real owners. After each recruitment cycle, the entire system was deliberately erased, including domain names and related accounts, creating a closed operational cycle that was difficult to detect without long-term cross-reference data. From the videos obtained during the investigation, authorities were able to identify several individuals who frequently appeared at related locations, including businessmen and high-income individuals from various countries, including the Middle East and Europe. Their common trait was not only financial capability, but also connections that could help them avoid ordinary scrutiny. The system they participated in required an almost absolute level of secrecy. New members had to undergo a strict background screening process and place a large financial deposit, while all activities were recorded and stored in encrypted form, creating a binding mechanism to ensure that no one could easily leave or disclose information. Meanwhile, the victims were moved between multiple locations, mainly short-term rented villas in the Dubai Marina area, an upscale residential district where the presence of unfamiliar individuals does not easily attract attention. Constantly changing locations allowed the system to avoid surveillance, while transportation was carried out during low-traffic hours to minimize risk. Subsequent forensic results indicated that the victims were controlled both physically and cognitively, causing them to lose the ability to resist and making it difficult for them to accurately recall what had happened. This explains why most cases left little to no clear information before contact was lost. By early March 2021, Maria was determined to have died at one of the locations used by this system, and it was only 3 weeks later that related evidence was discovered. Those behind it had attempted to erase all traces using various methods, including specialized equipment to eliminate physical evidence without relying on public infrastructure, making detection significantly more difficult. However, during a search of a related villa, investigators still found remaining traces in a basement area designed with soundproofing and a separate ventilation system, along with biological samples and personal belongings from multiple victims, including items that were confirmed by the family to belong to Maria. In addition, personal documents belonging to many other girls from different countries were also discovered at the scene, indicating that the number of victims could be far greater than initially recorded. The surveillance camera system in the area had been dismantled just before authorities arrived, suggesting that those behind it had prepared in advance to erase traces and minimize the possibility of being tracked. And from those remaining fragments, the overall picture of the system gradually became clearer, a tightly organized network, operating through structured processes and ready to erase all evidence the moment there was a risk of being exposed. Although most of the surveillance systems at the related locations had been destroyed before authorities arrived, technical experts were still able to recover part of the data from damaged hard drives using advanced digital analysis methods. The recovered data not only confirmed the existence of a professional recording system, but also provided a crucial sequence of images documenting the movement of victims, their confinement in enclosed spaces, and subsequent activities related to handling the aftermath. Although many segments were missing or fragmented, when reconstructed in chronological order, investigators were able to piece together a sufficiently clear timeline to determine the time of death of multiple victims, including Maria, turning previously isolated missing cases into specific time markers within a single operational system. At the same time, the analysis of telecommunications data opened up another line of approach. Call logs and communication records showed an unusual increase in the frequency of exchanges between key individuals during the period from mid-February to early March, coinciding with the time when the victims lost contact. Notably, communications between al-Hazrani and contacts in Dubai appeared at a much higher density than before, indicating that high-level coordination was taking place continuously. When cross-referenced with other data, investigators identified an important detail. The surge in communication activity was not to expand the system, but seemed to be aimed at handling an urgent situation. This hypothesis was further reinforced when analyzing the timeline of evidence-erasing actions. On March 28th, just a few days before the videos were released, a series of coordinated activities took place, including cleaning the locations, disabling storage systems, and cutting off communication channels, indicating that the network had been alerted in advance about the risk of exposure. This explains why, when authorities carried out the raid, most of the physical evidence had already been removed or damaged, making the evidence collection process significantly more difficult. During efforts to trace the source of the leaked data, the true identity of the anonymous user, Avenger, was eventually identified as Markus Schmidt, a German citizen working in the technical field in Dubai. Unlike those operating the system, Markus was not directly involved in recruitment or operations, but had access to the data system in a technical role. According to the investigation, in the months prior, he had been secretly copying data from internal servers, keeping it as a form of personal insurance in case of conflict with those behind the operation. The motive behind the release of the data did not stem from an intention to expose wrongdoing, but from a financial dispute. When a large payment was not made as agreed, Markus used the data he possessed as a means of pressure, and when that failed to produce results, he decided to publish part of the data on anonymous platforms. This action unintentionally became the biggest turning point of the entire case, as it revealed what had previously been completely concealed. Shortly after his identity was confirmed, Markus was arrested in Germany at the request of Interpol, but prior to that, he had deleted most of the stored data, leaving only a limited amount of evidence, including several video files and exchanges with individuals within the system. During interrogation, Markus admitted to copying and distributing the data, but denied having full awareness of the nature of the activities he was indirectly involved in, claiming that he did not clearly know the condition of the victims. Meanwhile, financial documents obtained from locations linked to al-Hazrani revealed the true scale of this network. Over a period of 3 years, more than $50 million had been circulated through related accounts, most of it disguised as sponsorships or donations for cultural and social activities. Further analysis showed that part of these funds was used to facilitate cross-border operations, including establishing relationships and influence in countries where victims were recruited. The money trails led to several Eastern European countries such as Russia, Ukraine, and Moldova, further reinforcing the hypothesis that this was a highly organized network operating far beyond a single nation. Those receiving bribes included visa officers, customs officials, and border police, with amounts ranging from $5,000 to $50,000 per case. The entire network operated through an extremely refined process. They set up fake modeling companies with fully legitimate documentation and provided victims with work visas, medical certificates, and insurance to avoid raising suspicion at airports. They would immediately isolate the victims from other passengers under the pretext of VIP service. From that moment on, all communication with the outside world was completely cut off. The victims were monitored by cameras 24/7, had their phones confiscated, and were threatened with the lives of their families. They were shown images of their relatives and home addresses to create psychological pressure and force absolute compliance. Medical care for the victims was carried out by bribed doctors in order to conceal the true causes of injuries and illnesses. At least 3 medical personnel were directly linked to this criminal network. They received enormous sums of money to remain silent. They provided medication and handled the consequences of abuse, yet never reported anything to the authorities. The investigation also uncovered connections between this network and similar organizations in other countries within the same region. When the investigation expanded beyond Dubai, authorities realized that this operational model was not confined to a single location, but had been replicated across multiple countries in the Middle East. Facilities with the same structure and methods were identified in Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, indicating that these were not independent sites, but branches within the same system. Although the names and outward appearances varied, the methods of recruitment, control, and concealment shared consistent characteristics, enough to determine that all were operated under a unified model. Based on the collected data, the number of victims across the region was estimated to reach into the hundreds, far exceeding the scale of a single case. In documents seized from al-Azrani's office, investigators also discovered plans to expand operations beyond the Middle East, targeting regions such as Southeast Asia and Africa. Internal analyses showed that the organization had carefully studied factors such as economic conditions, levels of legal oversight, and accessibility to potential victims, thereby identifying high-risk countries for establishing new recruitment channels. Countries such as the Philippines, Thailand, Kenya, and Nigeria were mentioned as potential targets, where the combination of opportunity-seeking demand and gaps in regulatory systems could be exploited. Inside these facilities, the technical infrastructure was heavily invested in, with recording and data transmission equipment that allowed operations to be conducted discreetly while still generating substantial profits. Part of the content was transmitted to clients who were not physically present through private channels, with very high access fees, turning the entire system into a closed business model. Clients were provided with encrypted internal materials, in which each victim was assigned a hidden identity along with detailed descriptive information, allowing services to be selected according to demand without requiring initial direct contact. To protect the entire system, multiple layers of security measures were put in place. Participants were required to undergo strict background and financial checks before being accepted, and had to sign confidentiality agreements with tightly binding terms to prevent information leaks. All communications were conducted through encrypted platforms and private forums, combined with the use of server infrastructure located in countries with loose data protection regulations, creating a multi-layered anonymous system that made tracing extremely difficult for investigators. Just as the raid operation was being initiated, a critical development occurred almost simultaneously on the other side of the city. The individual identified as the central figure of the network al-Azrani had left the UAE only hours before authorities reached the scene. According to air traffic control data, at approximately 3:20 a.m. on April 4th, a private jet departed from a private terminal at Dubai International Airport. The flight did not appear in standard commercial registration systems and did not disclose a detailed flight plan like regular civilian flights. The destination was identified as Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where al-Azrani maintained deep political and diplomatic connections. The timing of the departure almost exactly coincided with the moment investigators began searching the first locations related to the case, indicating a high likelihood that information about the raid had been leaked in advance. This was not a panicked escape, but a calculated withdrawal, prepared beforehand with the necessary resources and legal pathways in place. The use of a private jet allowed al-Azrani to completely bypass standard airport procedures, including passport control and passenger lists, while also leveraging privileges tied to his status and connections to travel without being stopped. This factor caused all immediate arrest efforts to fail, and from that point on, he effectively disappeared from the direct reach of international investigators. Afterward, the government of Saudi Arabia officially denied all allegations related to this individual, stating that the evidence presented was not sufficiently convincing and did not meet the necessary legal standards. Data sources, including videos and testimonies, were questioned in terms of reliability and were even suggested to have been manipulated or used for other purposes. In that context, the extradition request from Interpol was not approved, citing the protection of national sovereignty and the lack of a clear legal basis for the transfer. Nevertheless, al-Azrani was still placed on an international wanted list, but efforts to track him faced significant obstacles. One of the key factors was the complex system of personal documentation he possessed. In addition to his primary nationality, he held residency rights in Europe, investment visas, and even a diplomatic passport from another country, creating multiple legal identities that allowed him to move flexibly between regions without being bound to a single control system. This made tracking his movements extremely difficult and the enforcement of an arrest warrant nearly impossible to carry out in a coordinated manner. At the same time, authorities in several countries moved to freeze accounts linked to the foundation under his control, but most of the assets had already been withdrawn or transferred through intermediary financial structures beforehand. In Switzerland alone, investigators discovered more than $80 million held in accounts under proxy names and trust funds, indicating a pre-designed asset distribution system intended to avoid the risk of being frozen during disruptions. All of these factors, from legal privileges and extensive networks of influence to complex financial structures, created an almost impenetrable layer of protection, allowing al-Hazrani to continue moving freely while remaining out of reach of international law enforcement agencies. The UAE authorities later issued an official statement declaring that they did not have sufficient legal grounds to prosecute any individuals related to the case. According to their argument, the published data, including the videos circulating online, could not be fully verified for authenticity and may have been manipulated using modern image processing technologies. In addition, testimonies from related sources were considered lacking in independence and were not supported by clear physical evidence. They also emphasized that Maria had entered the country legally with all required documentation, with no signs of coercion at the time of border control, thereby placing the case in a legal gray area that was difficult to address under existing regulations. This statement quickly faced strong backlash from the international community. Many human rights organizations argued that dismissing all evidence based solely on technical doubts was not convincing, especially when there were multiple indications that the case had a systematic nature. International bodies called for an independent investigation to ensure transparency, while legislative organizations in Europe warned about the potential existence of transnational criminal networks in the region. At the same time, Russia repeatedly requested access to investigation files and data related to Maria's death, but these requests were not fully granted, citing confidentiality and jurisdictional limitations. Maria's family, in their pursuit of justice, brought the case before the European Court of Human Rights, alleging that the victim's fundamental rights, including the right to life and the right to a transparent investigation, had not been upheld. However, because the case involves multiple countries with different legal systems, the legal proceedings are expected to be prolonged, facing numerous obstacles related to jurisdiction and evidence. Throughout the entire sequence of events, the only sentence that was actually enforced targeted the individual who leaked the data Marcus on charges related to participation in and support of the network's activities. The court determined that although he did not directly operate the system, his exploitation and use of the data contributed to sustaining it, leading to a sentence of 8 years in prison. Meanwhile, many other individuals, including those believed to be directly or indirectly involved, were not prosecuted due to insufficient evidence or because of complex legal and diplomatic factors. In some cases, it was reported that financial payments were made to victims' families in the form of assistance, but without any acknowledgement of legal responsibility. In Russia, the investigation has continued with the aim of uncovering the entire network behind the case and determining the responsibility of each individual. However, the lack of international cooperation and legal barriers has made this process extremely difficult. In that context, the case has gone beyond a personal tragedy and become a typical example of the complexity of enforcing justice in cross-border cases where evidence, power, and law do not always align on the same plane. The lack of cooperation from the UAE has become one of the biggest obstacles, causing the entire investigative process to stall during its most critical phase. As leads began to converge and the identities of certain individuals within the network were gradually identified, access to crime scenes, the collection of additional evidence, and the execution of international legal requests all faced severe limitations. After 4 years, investigative agencies in Russia and several European countries have identified the roles of multiple individuals, including organizers and intermediary links, but to this day, no arrests have been carried out. As a result, the case remains under international manhunt status, with warrants issued but largely unenforceable due to legal and sovereignty constraints. In that context, Maria's story gradually became a symbol of the gaps within the international justice system when confronting organized transnational crime. Her case has been included in educational and awareness programs as a typical example of the hidden risks behind seemingly perfect job offers abroad. Authorities advise that any opportunity involving international travel should be independently verified, especially when originating from unclear sources. Years have passed, yet justice for Maria and the other victims has still not been fully achieved. Meanwhile, those believed to be behind the operation continue to exist beyond the reach of the law, protected by the networks and resources they have built. This reality has turned the case into more than just a personal tragedy. It has become evidence of a larger issue, when power, money, and a lack of coordination and international cooperation coexist. Bringing the truth to light does not necessarily mean that justice will be served. This story did not begin with obvious violence or coercion, but with a perfectly presented opportunity, a proposal designed to be unquestionable, and a decision that seemed entirely reasonable. What makes it dangerous is not what happens at the end, but how everything is constructed from the very beginning to lead to that outcome. In a world where identity, credibility, and opportunity can be created with just a few actions online, the ability to distinguish between what is real and what is not becomes a matter of survival. And sometimes, the cost of a single mistake is not just loss, but complete disappearance from the world without a trace. For that reason, this case is not only a personal tragedy, but also a painful illustration of a troubling reality. When power and financial resources are strong enough, they can create layers of protection that push legal accountability out of reach even in the face of actions that cause severe harm to others. As of now, this story remains in a gray area between reality and what has been circulated on the internet. There are no official records confirming it, and no clear legal conclusion. However, that does not make it meaningless, because what it reflects are real patterns, real methods by which modern crime operates, approaching through social media, building trust step by step, and exploiting dreams that seem harmless. And that is exactly where we need to pause and think. In today's world, the line between opportunity and danger is becoming increasingly blurred. Danger does not always appear in an obvious form sometimes. It is designed to look exactly like the opportunity you have been waiting for. If there is one lesson here, it is this: any opportunity that seems too perfect needs to be verified. Do not rely solely on what you see on the screen. Check, verify, and always maintain a safe distance from life-changing offers that come too quickly. And if you want to continue exploring cases, criminal patterns, and analytical perspectives behind how these systems operate, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here, we don't just tell stories, we break down the psychology, strategies, and real-world lessons that can help you better understand the world we are living in.